Richard the Lionheart became perhaps the most famous king in the history of England. Moral warrior, a crusader than a king, he really became famous on the battlefield in the Holy Land. But the biggest intrigue of the Middle Ages was his capture near Vienna, which launched a chain of events that influenced the course of European history. And it happened 830 years ago, on December 21, 1192. But the biography of Richard the Lionheart would have remained a lot of the study of historians, if one circumstance did not make him a superstar. And all thanks to the legends about Robin Hood, which Walter Scott later so successfully replicated in his novels. And when they stopped reading books, then Hollywood got down to business, which so trampled on the king in dozens of films that there was nothing left of the real story at all. Richard was like a useless king. For the entire period of official rule from 1189 to 1199, he practically did not appear in his native England. All this time, he fought somewhere, disappeared in his French possessions, and then, on the Third Crusade, he went to liberate Jerusalem captured by Saladin. But along the way, the Crusaders, without a shadow of embarrassment, captured Cyprus, which, in fact, belonged to Christian Byzantium. From this discord began. Each of the kings and rulers wanted to appropriate it for themselves, planting their relative as king there. In addition, Richard claimed the role of leader of the entire campaign and treated other rulers rather unceremoniously. So during the capture of Acre, the troops of the Austrian Duke Leopold V captured one of the walls and hoisted their flag there. Furious, Richard ordered to rip it off and replace it with his own, which mortally offended all German knights. As a result, Leopold leaves the camp. Even the fact that the Lionheart agreed to the election of his relative Conrad of Montferrat as king of Jerusalem, although he promoted his protégé Guy de Lusignan, did not help. It must be said that the Europeans loved to appropriate for themselves what they did not yet own. It is enough to recall how the Teutons a little later, even before the campaign against Novgorod in 1242, would appoint dukes and counts to Russian cities. Well, Alexander Nevsky cooled their ardor. Following Leopold, the French King Philip II August also left. This one generally hated Richard and claimed the French lands, which at that time belonged to the Dukes of Normandy, who also became the kings of England. As a result, Richard did not take Jerusalem, but obtained from Saladin permission to freely visit holy places by Christian pilgrims. Then he also went home. And then the proclaimed king of Jerusalem, Conrad of Montferrat, is killed in Tyre, and the organization of this crime is attributed to Richard. His enemies are actively spreading this completely unsubstantiated rumor throughout all the courtyards of Europe. He is readily believed, since the nephew of the English king, Henry II of Champagne, became the new king, without a kingdom. Now, in order to get into his own possessions, Richard must go through the lands of France and Italy, whose rulers accused him of a crime and swore to punish him. You won't go through Byzantium either. Cyprus was captured from them. I had to travel by sea, also carefully avoiding the Byzantine ships. So I got to the island of Corfu. It is assumed that Richard intended to go further through Dalmatia, which at that time belonged to Hungary, allied with England. And from there it was possible to get to Bohemia, which was also friendly, and there it was not far to their own lands. But for some reason he landed in the Gulf of Venice. Historians are still wondering why the Lionheart went to Vienna, where Duke Leopold was sitting. Perhaps this is due to the stubbornness of the king and his passion for adventure. It is known that all his life he managed to run into trouble and then heroically overcome them. But some precautions were nevertheless taken. Richard grew a large beard and changed his name. His companions did the same. But at the same time, they drove like a king. Everywhere they littered with money. They behaved quite noisily. In a word, they quickly attracted attention. As a result, Count Garcot already knew that the English king was coming. However, he did not arrest him himself, but informed his brother Count Engelbert about this. The chase began. Richard left her for some time, divided his detachment in order to confuse the enemy, and as a result, at some point, only 2 satellites remained with him. But it was not possible to avoid settlements for a long time. Hunger forced them to go out to people. Moreover, it happened already in the suburbs of Vienna. Naturally, the English king was immediately detained. Leopold immediately rode to the scene and the Lionheart gave him his sword. It happened just on December 21, 1192. The capture of the English king was an event of gigantic significance. As a result, the Sicilian kingdom, previously controlled by him, comes under the authority of the Holy Roman Emperor. By the way, Leopold, as a vassal, gave Richard overlord to the German Emperor Henry IV Hohenstaufen, brother of Frederick Barbarossa. But most of all, the French King Philip rejoiced. He demanded the immediate execution of Richard. However, the mother of the English king, Eleanor of Aquitaine, persuaded the emperor to give him his son for ransom. He appointed an unheard of sum of 150,000 marks, and this was the income of all England for 2 years. Then Lionheart sharply increased taxes to 25% and managed to collect the required amount. 2 years later, Richard was released to the great annoyance of Philip II Augustus. He already foresaw a big war with England for the French lands, which would later result in the 100 Years' War. The king sends Richard's brother Prince John, future King John the Landless, the famous note, "Be careful, devil on the loose." It is then that legends and romantic writers will replace the word devil with beast, and then lion. This is how the romanticization of King Richard I Lionheart will begin, which will become a symbol of the entire knightly Middle Ages.